watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. 'Cause it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. We could go nowhere. Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue.
Hello and welcome everybody to this session webinar on emotional support and mental health at the workplace. So pleased to see so many of you here today. And again, like always, please say hi in the chat and tell us where you're dialing in from in the world. It's such an honor to have people participating from all over the world because we are a global workforce, and this webinar is about mental health in the global workforce, not just in the US or in Europe or in Asia. It's for everyone. So glad to see so many people joining. And I'm also particularly very happy to be able to welcome this panel, who is also a global panel. You'll get a chance to introduce yourself just in a minute. But let me first tell you a little bit about the topic of today. My name is Pernille Hibbe-Brun, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Session. And Session, we deliver online coaching, business coaching. We connect professionals from all over the world with highly esteemed and greatly well-educated business coaches. And one of the things that we hear when we coach people in the professional life is that they are suffering sometimes from different issues mentally. It can be from their private life, sometimes also because there is a lack of great leadership, sometimes because the teams could step up better and help support each other as colleagues. And we, of course, try to help people to deal with that situation when we coach people and try to help them speak up, help them be honest about their own situation and suffering. And we also see that great leadership really can make a difference. So this topic is very, very close to my heart as a business coach myself, but also as a manager of my own company. I know how important it is to build a great culture. So therefore, when we were talking about what topic we should have for this next webinar of ours, this was an easy choice. So I'm really happy to welcome you with this topic. There's also, unfortunately, some reasons why it's right now very important to talk about it. Because if you look at some of the statistics made, that amongst people aged 16 years or older, approximately 20% reported that they were experiencing mental health problems over the course of a year. And this is not only in the workforce, but overall, of course. But this tells something about how important it is that we can build up workplaces where we are able to emotionally support our workforce. It's also interesting to see, unfortunately, that it's more prevalent amongst young people and amongst women. And the young people, the young generation, that's the future of our workforce. So therefore, creating conditions for them is so paramount and important. We also see a rise in mental health conditions after the pandemic, and also as a cause of the war in Ukraine. So we have an HBR study showing that last year, 76% of employees reported that they had experienced one or more symptoms of mental health conditions in the past year. So there's a rise. And this is, of course, we might assume due to the pandemic and some of the things that people have experienced there in terms of loneliness, not being able to reach out to loved ones for support, also being hindered in working. And for some people, it's really, really nice to actually be able to go to work and do what you do best, and you find your energy there. So of course, that might be some of the reasons. So we have these different issues. And I think one of the reports that came out lately from WHO showed that the pandemic has triggered a 25% increase in prevalence of anxiety and depression. So there's a good reason why we actually shed light on this important topic, and what can we do at the workplace in terms of supporting people suffering from mental health problems and trying to help out and see what we can do. So to help us discuss this and also shed light on some of the great examples of what can be done and how workplaces can be a source of support, we have Harry Eustace with us. We have Candice Knight. and we have Mette Louise Koggaard. And I want you, each of you, to introduce yourself and maybe tell the audience a little bit about why you're passionate about this topic, if you are, which I guess you are, and we chose you for it. And then we'll dig into the discussions with the first questions after. But Harry, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Harry Justice. I am from the US, as you might be able to guess by the accent. I grew up in Palo Alto in the heart of Silicon Valley, and about 3.5 years ago, I moved to Denmark, where I have been working at Tech Barbecue. Currently, my role as a project manager, I've had a few different things on my plate, but the part that I'm most passionate about is a project that I got to lead about promoting mental health and positive mental health practices for people who work in startups. This is a really important topic to me. My academic background is in psychology. It's what I did my bachelor's in, but it's also something very personal to me. Just because, my mom is a therapist, so I was raised kind of with mental health being a topic that we could discuss openly in our house, which, as I've gotten older, I've realized is not as common for everybody. And so one of the things that I've really wanted to do with this project and in general with my career is to help to get rid of that stigma for other people and show that, talking about mental health should be as natural as talking about any other topic. If
wow, and I already would
somebody
like
hurts them, yeah.
Yeah, I would
Sorry,
really like to already start asking you questions about this, Harry, because that's some of the things I'm really curious to hear more about. So thank you. And then we have Candice Knight also joining us.
Hello, everyone. I am Candice Knight. I live and work in Austin, Texas. I work in human resources at the intersection of culture and growth, which is most often called organizational development. Really, at its heart, it's about helping people to be successful and happy in their work. So that's why I'm excited about this particular topic. We cannot separate a person's mental health from their overall health, from the organizational health. They are intrinsically linked. So also personally meaningful to me, I've seen what it looks like when people prioritize mental health for themselves, and I've seen what it looks like when they don't. And it's a big difference. Quick background on me. I started my career as a teacher and then eventually worked on large-scale transformation initiatives within education and academia for about 10 years. Then shifted to, wanted to make a larger impact, so shifted to the tech sector and have been working in startups primarily for the past 10 years or so, and leading learning and development, organizational effectiveness, talent management, and culture.
Awesome. Thank you, Candice. And then we have Mette from Deloitte joining.
Thank you, Pernille. Yes, I'm Mette, and I'm Danish, as you can probably also hear on the accent. I am today heading up the risk advisory practice in Deloitte in Denmark, and I'm also part of the executive team in Denmark and have done a lot of leadership. I will come back to that. And for me, mental health it's simply good business. Might sound a little bit cold, but it is. But also as a leader and as someone who really likes people and being part of the team, it's of course also super important to see everyone thrive and actually, having a life as well as having a career. And you can say in a company like Deloitte, where we tend to work many hours, it's just a super important subject to be on top of. So, but I've not been in Deloitte for that long, actually not even a year. And I come from the industry and have been a CEO in several companies there, and have also led much larger organizations that I'm actually doing now. I'm leading 250 people now. I have led more than 1,000 people beforehand. So I also, have another maybe scalability and look into it in the discussion today. And with that said, I have always been close to people. So as you said, Candice, I've also seen the flip side of not taking care of yourself and not taking care of your people. So it is a super important subject we have today.
Thank you so much for your introduction. So I actually want to start out with a question for you, Mette. And that's about whose responsibility this is, because we've been talking about the individual and how important it is for each of us to take care of ourselves. And I spoke a little bit in the beginning about the importance of learning how to speak up if that's something you're not used to. And Harry, you touched upon some people learn it from childhood and in the surroundings they have, but some people don't. And there's a lot of stigma attached to this. But actually speaking about mental health at the workplace, whose responsibility is it to help create mentally healthy workplaces? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think, putting actions in place in a workplace will always be the leadership responsibility, right? It is the leadership creating the frames and the boundaries and investing in what they want to invest in. So it can only be a leadership, you can say, responsibility to make this happen. Then you also have to create a culture where everybody are not afraid to speak up, because then you will also get, you could say, the responsibility a little bit from the organization, them speaking up, telling you that this could be important, and then you listening and moving along with that. So maybe it's a little bit bigger than just the mental health. It's actually also, what is your culture like? And then what does people actually want to come forward with? Also a little bit back to Harry, right? That this is okay to speak about.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first part of the question, and I forgot the second part.
So the second part is basically how do we ensure that this is something that's talked about in the organizational settings? And you already kind of said that this is also about psychological safety and creating a culture where it's okay to speak up. But I want to show you just one slide more, and that's actually a definition of mental health by WHO. Which is very individualized when you look at it, right? So it's a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So if this is the definition, what happens then with the workplace? How does the workplace come into the picture? And Candice, I would like to ask you, from your perspective, from being an HR professional and working as someone who implemented programs and also helped support those, how do those two things interlink?
It's a great question. I'll start with the traditional model and how we do things today and how they're linked. And I'd love to talk about a little bit of best practices and how they could be linked in the future. But human resources traditionally has been focused on, we're advocates for employees, right? And so that advocacy has been primarily focused on the work itself. So how can we help people be successful in their roles, right? More productive, more, achieve greater results, et cetera. So that, and most of the policies and programs have been built around that in a more reactive model. So luckily, there's been a real shift in the last 10 years or so to looking much more broadly at employee experience, which then expands the scope far beyond just the work itself and really looks at things like fulfillment and meaning in your work, opportunity for career progression and development, finding balance. So this is a real expansion of what we mean by success, which now leads us to your question, which is, how does this intersect with organizations? And I completely agree that building a culture that supports mental health and overall health is critical. The way I define culture is the way we do things here. So it's very simple, but it means it's everything. So creating an operating model as a business that supports health is really critical.
So let me come back to that in a little bit about how do we then do that. And you said you have some best practices to share, which I'm really curious to hear more about. But Harry, I want to first ask you, so is there a difference when you look at startups where you've done a lot of your research and then look on a broader scale in terms of how much people are suffering in terms of mental health, or is it actually the same overall?
Sure. I mean, I can't really speak to the larger, the experience at larger corporations, just because that's not where I've worked before. My experience has been primarily in the startup space, and I would say that I can't say that there's more suffering in the startup space, but I can definitely say that they're more prone to it. Because when you run a startup, especially as a founder or an early team member, all that you're putting your all into this company. And especially as a founder, you really start to associate almost your self-worth with the worth of your company and the success of your company. And so it becomes much more of a personal thing to make sure that this company succeeds. It's like, it's your baby, and you want to do everything you can to make it actually. And so in that sense, people who work in startups are really likely to be more prone to things like burnout and those types of stress related issues, because there isn't really a work-life balance. It's all work. You take your work home with you. It's really hard to separate out, I just need to do one last thing and then I can go home. Because there's always something else to do when you're one of 3 people working at a company.
So when you've done your research into this, I think one of the findings you found was that there was this prevalence, and that people were actually experiencing a lot of these symptoms of mental health disorders. But is there also like something you could do on a systemic level there? Because this sounds like this is both personal, because you invest yourself as a person, as a startup founder, but there's also something that has to do with the conditions around it, and you have to, raise money and all those stressors that's
Right.
there. It's not a de facto, you have a business tomorrow, you need to, and that puts a lot of pressure on you, of course. But is
Absolutely.
there on a systemic level something you've experienced also in the startup community where you can actually build up programs just like Candice and Mette, I'm sure is going to speak about in a minute, on the more corporate level, that we could also maybe be inspired by here today?
Yeah, I would say briefly that it has a lot to do with, like, I really like Candice's definition of culture, that the way we do things when it comes to startups is sort of the culture that you've seen of the startups that have really made it big. And a lot of those companies, the story that you hear is the people who gave up all of their lives, worked 18-hour days to make their company successful, but they weren't living their life otherwise. And they lost out a lot because of that personally. And so I think that the things that really work systemically for startups, and the things that we can change to make it, not only to help entrepreneurs and founders be happier, but also just to make the entire ecosystem more sustainable for people, is to normalize talking about these struggles. Because especially like you mentioned with raising funds, the second that you mentioned that you've been feeling really stressed, investors might smell blood in the water and just be terrified to invest in you because they're worried about what you might do. If you burn out, where's their money going to go? So normalizing these conversations, removing the stigma from talking about mental health openly, and offering actual support services to people who need it are all really important steps that we could take towards making the startup ecosystem a lot more sustainable for founders and the people who work for them.
Okay, great. And Mette, you mentioned that people also work a lot in Deloitte. So that
Yes.
it might be that it's not only within startups that people tend to put their full self into that. And sometimes it gets blended between, work and private. Is there even like a distance there? And also we had a previous webinar where one of the panelists said, it's not about finding the right balance. It's about finding harmony, because the balance is never going to be there. Is that also something you experience? And what's some of the things that corporations can do to then help people find harmony? Is there something we can do?
Yes, there's something we can do, but first, I agree that we also work a lot in Deloitte, but I also, my experience is that it's not the work alone that makes these that gives these challenges on mental health. And I think Harry also talked into that, right? That it's also some of the pressure in the work, and what can actually go wrong, right? If I do not succeed now, then what can go wrong? And sometimes it's also something at home, not harmonizing with what is needed at work right now. And I think, we cannot create a world where everything's going like this all the time, right? So and that's why we need to work with some of the other stuff. How can we then work with ourselves to cope and survive in some of these situations? And I think there are different layers to this, because I think, if you do not have a sound culture of developing people, of being close to the people in the organization, having leaders that can actually see that, now it's getting a bit too much, and being in a large corporation, sorry, Harry, but then you actually have the opportunity to shift things a little bit around. So there are some underlying stuff that simply needs to be in place. And if that's not in place, you can talk mental health from now to, Timbuktu, and it's not going to help, right? So there are some, that just needs to be there. But then what we do in Deloitte is that we simply do programs. We are, as we are so fortunate that we can do that. So we propose things that people can, sign up for and be part of. It's free, you don't pay, and it's not mandatory, it's for your own choice, and you can pick and choose a little bit what you think is right and how you want to do it. But that's simply putting tools in place, and it could be, breathing sessions, a go home, dialogue on getting a good night's sleep. How do you do that if everything is going 350 kilometers an hour in the head? How do you get to a state where you can actually have a good night's sleep? It's food and hydration, and it's massage, and it's sports, and it's really diverse what we do. We can't do it, Vanilla.
You cannot hear me? You can hear me? Yes. So is that what you call employee assistance programs, or does it go beyond that?
You're asking me again? Yes. And what do you mean by going beyond that?
Yeah. So in many organizations, we've successfully seen employee assistance programs being installed where you can go whenever something is not going right for you. But that is also maybe individualizing the problem a little bit. And I wanted to ask you, so you started out by mentioning that leadership is paramount, and if you don't have the right culture, I mean, all the other things might be helpful, but that's not going to do it in itself. So when I say beyond, does it go beyond that? So whenever you offer, for instance, a sleeping app or meditation app, is that within your program of employee assistance programs, or do you also have other things that you do in Deloitte to support the mental health of employees?
This is very much what we do. And then we have, you can say, if people are stressed, and we actually have a situation where people simply need to go home and be sort of free of the work they have. We have also a sickness insurance where we can provide, psychological help, and because that's also, a mental help to get back. But that's when we are all there, when we're out there where it has already gone wrong. But we have also tools for that, and then we educate our leaders also in stress and pressure, and how can we spot it so that we don't get there. But that's more a learning thing. We do not have something that if you come through the door in the morning and you can feel that you're really not doing well, and you actually don't know how to come through the day because you have all of this, we don't have anywhere where you can go and get help for that but your leader. So you will have to go to your leader, and then you will get help.
And that's why we prioritize leaders being educated within this field.
Yeah.
Okay. And so to the question about making it an individual responsibility to, get well or get better.
Yeah.
Candice, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because you talked about going from being reactive to being proactive. And I wanted you to maybe elaborate a little bit more on that topic. What did you mean by that? Is that speaking into some of the things we're talking about now, or was it something else you meant?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to make 2 points, if you don't mind, because I'd love to address what Harry and Mette were saying. so important, and completely agree with both of them. I think that the stress in the workplace is not going away. So I think the solution here is not to remove the stress, unfortunately, but rather how we address it. So the thing about stress is some of it can be quite motivating. So it's not all negative, right? But there's a point of diminishing returns. So in a startup environment in particular, but really anywhere, I think the secret is to build an operating model, a culture that leans into the positive side of stress with things like, stretch opportunities for career progression, right? Like some motivating factors. And then enable managers, as Meta said, to identify that point, that diminishing return point, the drop off, identifying that proactively so that we can then intervene and make sure that people are not falling off of that cliff. So yes, but to your question, Pernilla, which was more about systemic, let me make sure I'm remembering your question.
Yeah, exactly. Systemic. And where is the line between individual responsibility and then workplace responsibility, and maybe having programs offered at a systemic level where you support on the basis of leadership training, and maybe having a thriving culture and making sure there's resources built into the system to support that, and then the individual responsibility.
Yep. So I think that there's responsibility across stakeholders, but it looks quite different for everyone. And currently, most of the responsibility is on individuals to speak up if they are struggling. And of course, the HR team really to reactively intervene and support when needed. I'll say that the unspoken practical responsibility right now is mostly on direct managers and teams, because they interact most with people, right? So they are seeing when people are struggling, and I think are currently, most of them, ill-equipped to help. So this positive shift to a more systemic support structure would look like many of the things that have been mentioned already about having a more robust support system in place when people are struggling. I also want to add to the conversation the kind of a positive psychology approach, which is looking at it, yes, as solving problems when we need to, which is critically important, but also as shifting our perspective to thinking about how we build on our strengths, or how we recognize potential that's there. So it's really about thinking about building health rather than problem solving when people are struggling.
Okay, that's really interesting, because we actually at our last webinar touched upon this difference between offering reactive and proactive benefits. So I wanted to just briefly show you this slide once again, how to create a caring culture, a culture where people feel they belong and are included on a daily basis. And it actually showed exactly what you're touching upon right now, Candice, that there's something about having that day-to-day nurturance from leadership and from programs that you can benefit on a daily basis, versus only getting it when you need it when you are in a crisis. And in terms of happiness, and this study shows that if you really want to build team happiness and mentally supportive organizations, it looks like what is more important to employees, that is that they get it as part of the employee journey rather than only on a reactive basis. So that builds completely on what you're just talking about now. And I wanted to ask Harry maybe one more question about your research, because as a result of destigmatizing mental health issues amongst founders and entrepreneurs and in the startup ecosystem, you also came up with a recommendation booklet, like a really well written little, I can highly recommend reading into that report. We can share it after the webinar with everybody, but can you tell us a little bit about what was it actually you highlighted there in terms of what can be done here?
Sure, absolutely. Most of the recommendations that we make in that founder toolkit, which is what we called it, I worked with another Danish business psychologist named Cecilia Willer on that, and the essentially what that toolkit talks about is tools for founders, especially around maintaining their own, like one of the really big recommendations that we make for founders is separating yourself from your business, that you are not your company. That was a really big one. Also, just thinking really carefully about what your values are and making sure that as you go through the journey of having a startup, that you're sticking to your values and that you're not compromising for the sake of trying to succeed. Also, just some like more, I wouldn't say normal, but sort of more broad psychological tools like self-compassion, being nicer to yourself. We're often our own harshest critics. I know that I am. Nobody's meaner to me than me. And remembering that, you know, you want to treat yourself how you'd treat a close friend. That was a really important recommendation I think that we make. There's also we have a whole section on coping with worry and uncertainty, which I think is really useful. I would also recommend checking out this toolkit, because even if you're not a startup founder, a lot of which, like, for example, I've never started a company, but these are a lot of tools that I really find valuable in my own life outside of work. Just if I'm having a rough day, take it a little easier on myself, thinking about what I can control versus what I can't. Those sorts of things really help me to stay on the level.
So it's destigmatizing, but it's also giving tools on how to handle negative thoughts from spiraling into something really bad, and stopping yourself and helping yourself in that sense. And I think there's a question here from one in the audience, and feel free to ask questions in the comments section for the panelists here. So this question comes from Esther, and she asks this broad question. It might be for all of you, but I think she wrote it when you were speaking, Mette. How do you support your leaders furthermore than training? And this is actually interesting right after your comment, Harry, about there's something you can do as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and as any individual, but also as a leader. And I think maybe this question, Esther, correct me if I'm wrong, but it might be something about that she's also thinking about. But feel free to put your comments here. What's your thoughts on this, Mette?
Yeah, I was actually also thinking a little bit about the same when Harry was speaking, because and you can say one thing I do is to be in this call, right? Because I think, you know, we're not that mature on this agenda yet in many companies, and neither are we in Deloitte. Just to be totally frank on that. Not that we have not worked with it for many years. But when I say mature, then it's maybe, you know, it's not part of our operating model to get back to also what Candice is saying. So there is a lot of, you know, skepticism and you know, bias, if I should be really harsh on this, because, you know, shall we really spend time, you know, and money and you know, can it be done, you know, Friday afternoon at 4:00 so that we can still plug the hours for the clients? Now I'm, you know, but those are the kind of discussions that is also coming on the backside of some of this. And I know it's coming in many organizations, because the understanding of, as I started out to say, this is just good business, is not really there yet. And so for me, it's also about, you know, talking about it and bringing it on the agenda is actually also doing something for the leaders. But what we do in Deloitte for our leaders is that we give some training, and then we put, you know, tools in place for the individual employees. And then when you have employees that might experience some difficulties, you can of course appoint to the tools. But we do not have, you know, like a program or a lot of formal toolbox for specific for leaders that they can use for this, to be honest.
So maybe something to think about for the future, or to point out. Because you also touch upon a really important factor if you look at some of the statistics here, right? So if we look at this, we can tell that it actually really matters how you invest in this. So there's a lot of money wasted due to not doing something about helping people suffering from mental health disorders and issues, experiencing different conditions. But for every dollar spent and invested in helping employees with their mental health, there's a $4 return on investment in productivity. And this is a very recent study done by the World Economic Forum. So you are touching upon something, Mette, when you say that it pays off. And I think it's you said something in the beginning about it's good business. So what's your thoughts? And this is for all of you. What's your thoughts on this? How can we help companies understand this business model actually better and maybe convince them? Because there might be a lot of different finance departments sitting out there thinking, yeah, this all sounds good, but we're struggling, we don't have enough money, and we are already suffering from high retention rates, and people, how do we best invest our money? Is that in mental health initiatives, or should we rather spend them on branding, or in just winning new customers and purely surviving under those conditions we have today? What would be your answer to those concerns coming from finance and from other decision makers in terms of helping install programs and help destigmatize and have toolkits for employees in terms of mental health?
But I can start out real quick, and then I'll leave the floor to both Candice and Harry after that. And I just think, just having the numbers, as you just showed, is actually a big help. And, we are through some of the same journey on diversity, right? It's like, it is also super good business, but we don't really have the numbers, and they are all around. So actually having the numbers when you come with some of this, and when you want to set this agenda, is going to help a lot in the leadership team.
I'd love to add to that. I completely agree. And I think that having the data is really important, and the data exists. This is a longer game, right? So this is not immediate returns. It's much more strategic. And so I would encourage HR leaders and this shift is already happening, HR leaders to become more strategic in how they partner with the executive team, and really aligning the HR strategy with business strategy, so that we're connecting what's great for people with what's great for the business. I think that another set of data that's really powerful right now is the competition for talent. This is a very tight market, and the market has changed. So mental health and overall health has become quite important to job seekers, which will speak to the finance team, right? If we want to hire the best, we need to make this a priority here. It used to be that having this support system around mental health and health in general was a differentiator. Now, not having it is a differentiator. In other words, it's become the baseline.
Is this something you've experienced in the different places where you work, that this was actually a differentiator when people were looking for a job where you were head of HR?
Absolutely. Yes. I think you are. So again, it goes back to culture. So people are really examining, and I've seen this shift over the last, I would say 10 years or so. Job seekers are really examining the culture at the companies that they are joining. It's no longer just about the work. It's about life and how our work feeds and reinforces the life that we want to live. So I've seen that done quite well. And I've seen it done not as well. I'll say one thing, speaking to finances, the most powerful lever that we have to create change is culture, meaning what the executive team does. So if culture is the way we do things here, if the executive team is valuing and prioritizing mental health, then everyone else will do it as well. And that is free.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And there's actually another question here. What's a good tip you can give anyone to get your leaders to buy in, to invest in this? Maybe not only the people with the money, but also leaders. Why should they spend time on getting training within this? Why is it a good idea to even think about this? And I think you already answered some of it, Candice, but maybe Harry, do you have another something you want to add here, because you also had to speak with entrepreneurs and founders about why they should take it seriously, their own mental health.
Yeah, I think that really my answer to this would be building upon what's already been said with showing people the data, because I think that especially when people are in leadership roles, it's a very data-driven kind of way to be. And so you need the combination of having the data on hand to show them, like, as Meta said, and I agree, this is just good business. And that's the way to do it, is to actually speak their language. You know, people are a lot more likely to listen to you and to buy into what you're saying if you meet them where they're at. So if somebody doesn't really know any, you know, for example, if I were to talk about, you know, the importance of mental health from like a, you know, like a brain neurotransmitter level and how you need a specific neurotransmitter to be happy, most people's eyes are just going to glaze over. But if you're talking to, you know, executives at a company and you're talking about, you know, this isn't just something that sounds good, this is something where you're actually, you know, you're investing in the future of your company by caring about this. And by using those terms that, you know, mean something to them, you're a lot more likely to get them to listen. And if you can get them to listen, then, you know, you're a big part of the way to getting them to agree.
So this also builds on maybe something you said, Candice, about going from reactive to proactive. I'm sorry for getting back to that again, but is this in the same line of that, actually, so that you help them see what's in it for us, rather than if we don't do anything, or if we have this condition here and now we need to do something about it in a reactive way? How does that compare?
Yeah, it absolutely relates. I think it's we've touched on a few of the sub points, but the larger point around building something positive and proactive is that we move from what feels natural in a business setting, which is solving problems. So successful businesses are very good at solving problems, right? The challenge is that we approach mental health the same way, as a problem to be solved. And so the shift in perspective to building health, in addition to supporting when people are struggling with mental health, is one that is much more strategic. So I think we need to bring a strong strategy, a strong ROI for that, and it exists. Yeah.
And Mette, did you have something you wanted to add? Because maybe you can tell us a little bit about what did you experience, or what do you experience whenever you've spoken with leaders in the teams you've led, companies you've led over the past many years? What has the reaction been in the organizations, not only Deloitte, but also elsewhere you've been, whenever you started talking and promoting this theme?
But I will say, you know, it has been a journey over the last 5 to 10 years that this has really gone on the agenda. And as it usually is with a lot of this, you know, it comes from the bottom and up. Actually, the employees are much more clever on many of these agendas than the leadership is, if I should be super honest. And that's also why it is so important to listen to what is going on. So it actually has been this, you know, is it worth it, and how does it work, and what do we get out of it? And it is these totally normal, and I will call them management questions in this setup, right? And just also to touch a little bit upon what Candice and Harry is saying here. I think if we look at some of the very modern companies and also clients that I work with, you know, they actually look to go further when they invest in something. And that's also going to the proactive part of this. And I think that many companies is going to experience legislation on what we call ESG, right? We normally call it climate, but it's actually much broader than that. So the S in here is for social. So it's up on, you know, how are you actually promoting a healthy and diverse workplace as a company. And at some point, this is going to be much more visible also, you can say, in the more legislative dialogue that many companies will have to enter into. So I also think, you know, depending on how your leadership is, and if they are quite foresighted, you could also, as an employee, if you want to sell this a bit more, argue that you could maybe really be a front runner here and really make it an asset. And not only will you get, the best employees, but you will actually also be kind of a leading star for others, and there will be business in that at some point. But I think I think it will move closer, and it's not going to be something that you can choose.
No. So it's interesting you mentioned ESG, so environment, social, and governance, and you mentioned it as part of the the social part of that. With your title, which is interesting because you don't have the mental health title, Mette. How come you, with your position, actually found interest in this topic?
Yeah, but first of all, I am a leader.
If you could repeat your title, that would be great.
Yeah, but I'm partner in Deloitte, and I'm heading up one of the 5 business areas we have in Deloitte, Denmark, and I'm working with risk.
Exactly.
And actually, sustainability and ESG is part of that. So I also advise clients on this matter, right? But my interest comes from being a leader, driving business, knowing that there's value in this. It comes from, I want all the best talents to be part of my team. So if I do this really well, more really great talents would like to join. But it's of course all the understanding that it is simply good business to do as we do. Then in Deloitte, I'm also part of the executive team, and I'm part of our people committee. So you can say that there we sort of get into something where it's maybe more obvious why am I working with this and why am I so close to it in Deloitte. But it is because it is close to my heart, and I truly believe that this is of great value, and you simply create stronger and better organizations, and you win in the market when you do this in a good way.
And it is very interesting that your title is within risk, right? Because you did just mention exactly what Esther also touches upon here with the cost of not doing things. The risk of not doing anything is also high, and the benefits of building it into your business model and talking about it openly is really great. So there's another question here. How can it be measured? And we saw some numbers before where they did that research and showed that every time you invest $1, you get $4 back in productivity. So it actually does pay off, and it's a good way to put it. But the question here is valid, because how do you measure it, and what is it you look for in your different organizational settings, both in the startup world, Harry, and also Candice and Mette, within larger corporations? How do we measure this?
But I can start. No, sorry. Yeah. No, come on, Harry.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, so I can take sort of 2 perspectives on this. One is my sort of the academic idea of measuring mental health is probably a little bit too personal to be able to be effectively implemented in businesses. You can't, I think, just for sort of people's privacy, it would be kind of strange for you to be giving them the kind of measures that psychiatrists would use to measure, say, whether you have depression or an anxiety disorder. So at the business level, a lot of the time, what you're looking for is more correlational. You're looking for, things that are related to mental health. So you're looking for, how many sick days are people taking? Lost productivity. When people say that they need are like in conversations with their managers, or a lot of your employees saying that they're stressed. Do people seem happy at the workplace? It's a little bit harder to get really hard numbers on this sort of thing without some pretty specific tests, but just using kind of observational measurements, you can learn a lot about how your employees are doing, and and monitoring is essentially ongoing measurements. So you just do these measurements more than once and see how they change over time. So that's how I would answer it in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mette, you also had a comment on that one.
Yes, but it's the same, right? You'll have to look for sickness. You'll have to look in your employee poll, whatever you do. You'll have to look at the churn. How good are you at actually keeping people on board. What we actually also do in Deloitte is that we do specific, you can say, surveys. And then we have to rely on that people actually answer, correctly and we also did that during the pandemic. So we do that to have a kind of an idea of where we are, and we actually have a number on how many in the organization feel stressed because we do these services or surveys.
Yeah, and you can act accordingly, so you can see if it rises. Then yeah, all right, interesting. There's another question here. How can I save myself from a toxic workplace until I leave? So that's a sad one, actually, right? Because that's what a lot of people feel sometimes, that they have to stand through this. And with the retention rates we have right now, where it's harder to keep people on board, and we see people shuffling around to an extent we haven't seen before in the history. It's very sad that this question comes up, because this is what some people feel, right? So is this something we should help individuals with, or what would be your reaction to this question?
This is a question that we get a lot in HR departments, right? So I think it's layered, and it really depends. But I would say it's really in the eye of the beholder. So a toxic work environment is in the eye of the beholder. So I would dig in on an individual level about what that looks like and what that means. Could it be that a different team within the same company, is it at the team level? Is it at the, systemic level? A lot of questions there.
Yes.
And I would employ the tools that are available in virtually every workplace to help support people who are struggling. And I would lean into some career coaching at this point. So if you're interested in working in a different environment, can we use that as an opportunity for growth, right? So what could be next? How could we turn this negative situation into a positive opportunity?
Yes. Okay. So that's a really good answer to that. So you would ask a lot of questions. So the first thing you do at an organizational level, if you meet a person feeling this way and helping and trying to support, it would not be to give them the tools to survive. It would rather be to see, can we fix something here on a systemic level, perhaps? And if that's not possible, then the next level would be to, of course, support the individual. But let's hope that doesn't have to be the case very often, because that's not what we are aiming for here, hopefully. There's another question. I think this is one of the last ones we can take today. WHO has 5 questions which score a person's well-being. Is that being used, to your knowledge, in some organizations? Nope.
I have not seen it used to date, but I believe, if my assumption is correct, I believe that tool, those questions from the WHO, are within the last 5 years or so. So I believe it'll take some time to be implemented.
Yeah. So in general, let's start now to think about summing up. I would like for each of you to give your inputs on what's your main takeaways from this discussion. And also, if there's something you would like to say towards the end of this webinar that haven't been said or touched upon already, now is your chance. So I'll start off with you, Candice. What is your main takeaways from today's panel?
I'll say on a personal level, it's validating for me to hear that what I'm seeing and experiencing in the workplace is true globally as well. My takeaway from today is actually that we each have a story to tell that relates very much to this topic, right? So mental health is important to everyone. I think that we have our families, our friends, our work environment. It's personal. And so I'd say our work in this area needs to be grounded in business and strategy and ROI. But we should not separate that from the personal, because we do each have a story to tell.
Thank you. And Mette, what would be yours?
But I would say that I'm actually, I feel more, not that I haven't felt hope on this agenda, but I really feel hope today. Because, you pull together 3 totally, different people, never met before, talking on this subject, and we are actually quite online. or in line with, what is needed and what is the issues and how should we go about this. So I think that sort of that cares for that. Yeah, it is more mature, and also meaning that we will get much further in the coming years within this field. And I think that's super nice.
Great. And Harry, what about you?
Two main things. One was just, it was really nice to hear Candice talking about this proactivity over reactivity. This is something also that I had focused a lot on in the report that I edited for the project that I was working on, and just the fact that came up, even though we've never really spoken about this before. It was a nice reminder of just remembering that regardless of what field we're in, we're all a lot more alike than we are different, and there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much. And I must say that this topic, we've only just scratched the surface, right? So in terms of being inspired by different best practice examples from large and small organizations, we are going to, in the next couple of weeks, also publish a few links for companies that have extensive programs rolled out. We have an example in Johnson & Johnson, who really has a very, very extensive program rolled out. But my main takeaway from what all of you said today is basically, that's fine and good, but if you can't convince leadership and you can't convince your leaders to actually implement this, then that's where you're going to start. So to help out on a more systemic level, and speaking about proactive and reactive, and gathering people in talks about why is this of importance, and making it personal is perhaps the most important thing we can do in the coming years. So thank you so much to all of you for participating in this panel discussion. We'll keep the discussion live on social media and also in articles and things coming up from us. And thank you to everyone for joining from all over the world. It's always a pleasure seeing this many people paying interest into HR related matters and how we can build great and flourishing organizations for the future. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. Guess it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dark.